First met him in 73 and then again in 79, right before he left the body. So my presentation consists of personal recollections and impressions. But Dennis is going to start by telling us a little about his life.
He was born in 1904, April 21st. His father was this Ramaswamy. And Ramaswamy was the son of Alagamal's brother, who lived in Dindigo. And Ramaswamy's wife is Srimati Amalu. She passed away when Ramaswamy, soon after Ramaswamy was born. So Ramaswamy was brought up mostly by Alagamal in Tiruchuli. And even when Bhagavan was born, after Ramaswamy, Alagamal was hoping that Bhagavan would be a girl, so he could marry Ramaswamy. So they're planning marriages even before birth.
Yeah.
So he grew up, Ramaswamy grew up and been a respected advocate, and he had, I think, 4 or 5 sons, and the third was Swami Viswanathan. And Swami Viswanathan, at a young age, he was interested in scriptures. He was a Veda Pathasala student, some Sringeri mutt there in Dindigo, and he knew Sanskrit even at a very young age. He was academically minded, very one-pointed and focused. And when Mahatma Gandhi's movement came, he immediately latched onto that and became very active in Mahatma Gandhi's independent movement, even as a teenager. So he first saw Bhagavan when he was active in this movement, even at 16 years old or 17 years old. He happened to go to Tiruvannamalai, and that's where he saw, his, you can say, his relative, like a second cousin.
Yeah.
And he went up and saw Bhagavan. He was very impressed when he saw Bhagavan. He was, in fact, he said, what did he say? When he first wrote, he wrote to somebody when he first saw Bhagavan, he said, Bhagavan's most powerful presence completely annihilated my ego. That's what we all want. He said, I can't say anything more. So, but then he was only 16 or 17 years old. So he went back home, but before he left, Ramana Maharshi gave him Sri Ramana Gita to read and study. So he did that when he got home. And he continued his studies for like 2 more years. But by the time he turned 19, he realized he just wants to be there with Ramana Maharshi, with Bhagavan, and self-realization is the purpose and meaning of life. So he left that Gandhi movement, and he, without telling his parents, he left and went to visit Bhagavan in 1923.
50 years.
In January 1923. And Bhagavan asked him, did you tell your father or your mother that you left? He said, nope. He said, write them a letter. So he wrote them a letter, and then they got a letter back that Ramaswamy, his father, was coming to see. And surely with the objective to bring him back home. Because he heard about his cousin, becoming a sadhu living in Arunachala, and now his son ran away and joined his cousin. So Bhagavan said, oh, the mountain is moving. Ramaswamy is coming now, because he never came there. What?
Vishwanath Swami said to Bhagavan, the Dindigo Mountain.
Oh, the Dindigo mountain is moving.
Yeah.
That's his father, who never came to see Bhagavan. So he came with the intention to bring his son back, but as soon as he saw Bhagavan, he realized the greatness. Just on seeing him, he prostrated before him. So then he didn't leave until Bhagavan promised him that he would take care of his son, look after him, make sure nothing happened to him, to teach him and guide him. And Bhagavan said, I'll do all that. So that was in 1923. So Viswanath Swami was also interested in learning Sanskrit, and Bhagavan sent him to Ganapati Muni, who was living there in Tiruvannamalai at the time. And he also became a disciple of Nayana, or Ganapati Muni, who taught him, many mantras. And, even, we know that Swami Viswanathan wrote 108 names on Bhagavan, which is recited daily there. And even Bhagavan and Ganapati Muni went over his composition, which we have a recording of. We're going to play in the end. We have a recording of him singing it.
Wow.
But it's from 1973, and we have to do some work on it. You can listen to it. So here's the last. This is from like the obituary and the mountain path. Sri Viswanath Swami in his final years was sought by ardent devotees from India and abroad for clarification of doubts. In the evening, several devotees used to meditate with him in his room. He used to stay in the dispensary building.
Yeah.
We've stayed there. I remember one Bhakta Bhagavat, maybe 1977, we're staying right next to him. And we would recite the Lalita Sahasranam. We're jet lagged, couldn't sleep 3 o'clock in the morning or something. I said to Bhagavat, let's recite. So we recited. Swami Viswanathan came a little late. I was so wonderful to hear that in the morning. We can hear it every morning. So every morning we recited it while we're staying there. And, so he said, in the evening, several devotees used to meditate with him in his room. He did not talk much. When he did, the subject was either on Bhagavan or Nayana. He had the rare privilege of observing and of hearing them in close proximity. However, he never boasted of his association with them. He was without any ego of any kind. He never made any fuss about himself. He looked after his needs himself and did not depend on others. He mingled freely with the high and the low. There was no exhibition of his scholarship or his lifelong sadhana or deep spirituality. While he had a thorough grasp of Bhagavan's teachings, he also had deep faith in the potency of great mantras, having been influenced by Nayana. He worked as the editor of the Mountain Path for the last, 3 years. I remember he wrote a letter about that. He said he didn't want to do any of this, but they're pressuring me, and this is what I have to do. Bhagavan telling me I should do this, so I'm doing it. And they convinced him to write his Reminiscences, which you find in those 1978 and 79 issues of the Mountain Path, which he never wrote previously. He had, he also translated, I think you have it over there, talks of Ramana Maharshi into Tamil. I saw someone wrote it, put a copy there. And I remember when I was there, if the ashram had to make any decision on some administrative level, which they considered important, they would always go and consult Swami Viswanathan, who would just sit and listen to them and maybe say a few words. So the boy who surrendered to Bhagavan in his teens merged with Arunachala at the age of 75 on October 22nd, 1979. His samadhi is near the sacred tank, Yama Tirtham, on a site specially selected by the ashram president, Sri T.N. Venkataraman, who showered on Sri Viswanath Swami his love and affection till the last minute. Hundreds of devotees will cherish the memory of this unostentatious and simple child of Bhagavan. And this is the earliest picture we have of him at Ramana.
So I'm going to read my recollections from our first visit in 1973, and then I'll read excerpts from some letters that were instructive that we got from Viswanatha Swami, and then recollections from 1979 January, which was the year he left the body. When we first arrived at Sri Ramanashramam in 1973, in the company of Sri Arunachala Bhakta Bhagavat, it was dawn. We unfurled the ashram banner, a glorious creation of bright ochre cloth and bold letters declaring the name of Arunachala Ashram, and we marched to the old hall chanting, Arunachala Shiva Ki Jai. This was to be the fulfillment of an inspiration conceived by Bhagavad-ji, who was instrumental in founding the New York ashram, inspired by his days of moving and marching in the service of the Indian independence movement. In reality, when we arrived at the gates of the ashram, we newcomers were quite overwhelmed. In fact, so overwhelmed it was difficult for us to utter the cries that would have made any impression. Sri Ramanashramam then, as now, was clothed in a cloak of the most pristine silence at dawn. Well, this is how I remember it, and others might remember it a bit differently. I am mentioning this incident as it marked our entry into Sri Ramana Loka, the blissful atmosphere of Sri Ramanashramam that drew us and continues to draw ever-increasing crowds of devotees to itself, like metal filings to a magnet.
Evelyn, who is we? Who all went?
Oh, I was with her that time.
That's coming. It's
Oh,
right here.
okay.
It was on that very day of wonder that we were ushered into the small and austere room of Viswanathan Swami, who sat cross-legged on a chowki in white cotton dhoti and kurta. Our band of devotees included Shri Arunachala Bhakta Bhagavat, his wife Yogamaya and son Bhaskar, Joan and Matthew Greenblatt, Dennis Hartle, and myself. The Swami's room was devoid of decoration, and there was no evidence of any possession whatsoever. Viswanath Swami was in a state of bliss when we were ushered in and seated in a row on the bench opposite his chowki. His first words to us penetrated my heart like an arrow and resonated with what in our hearts we already know. He said, "There is a center in man where there is no ignorance, where there is pure awareness." At that very moment I understood we were in the presence of one like Bhagavan. One felt his absolute authenticity and spiritual greatness, yet Viswanath Swami's spiritual wealth was covered in the guise of a devotee. Bhagavan had advised his closest disciples to avoid the role of spiritual preceptor and its complications, and Viswanathan had taken this to heart. Years later, in 1979, Viswanath Swami had confided to me with a modest laugh, "When I was born, my father consulted an astrologer who told him, 'This child will rise high.' What could be higher than to be a devotee of Bhagavan?" It was soon after that we went on our first pradakshina with Swami Viswanathan. So now the time clock has gone ahead 50 years, and he's no longer a boy of 14.
I moved to that picture.
You can get the pradakshina photo.
Let me see.
This is photo we took in 73 on pradakshina.
Oh.
Very noble. On our first pradakshina, Viswanath Swami was ebullient. Clearly his natural state of mind was filled with the bliss of total immersion in Bhagavan's presence. As we walked with him around the hill, he opened our eyes to its wonders and to the carefree happiness that he and his fellow disciples had experienced while going around the hill in the presence of Bhagavan. Those were, of course, different days before the noise of trucks and buses, and days in which the hill was covered with vegetation and inhabited by wild animals of all sorts. In those days, Bhagavan and those close to him might spend days going round the hill, cooking at different locations. Viswanath Swami would take us to various places where they had lingered with Bhagavan and say, this is where we sat, or this is where we cooked. Let us sit here a while. At one spot he faced the mountain and called out in a booming voice, "Anomaly!" And we heard the name of the holy hill echoing back, as if the mountain itself were rejoicing in the sound of its sacred name. Ah, what joy it was to us all, as close to being in the physical presence of Bhagavan as we might have imagined. We could not see him, and yet we could feel him. We could feel the bliss, the love, and the delight of his proximity. It was on this circuit of the hill, thank you, that Arunachala Bhakta Bhagavat began to describe the practice of evening recitation that we did in Arunachala Ashram, located at that time in the East Village, an East Village storefront at First Avenue and East 6th Street in New York City. Somehow, as we approached the town, we burst into our evening recitation and sang as we marched, quite oblivious to whatever strange impression we might have been creating. As we began the ashram chants of Arunachala Shiva, our fervor and innocent enthusiasm overtook us, and we marched in the blissful presence of Arunachala Shiva back to the ashram. I have no recollection of sore feet. We must have really been out of our bodies, for we were going without sandals, eager to accrue the punyam of being barefoot on the hill. When we went to Viswanathan Swami's room the following morning, he told us, "When I first was introduced to you, I did not understand your spirit. No one has had the courage to do that." And he also pulled us up on our pronunciation of the holy name of Arunachala, as we had been doing it in the North Indian style, chanting Arunachal. After that, our first evening pradakshina, Viswanathan Swami took an active interest in our small band. What an unspeakable gift. He took us on 2 more pradakshinas, and also to many places where Bhagavan had lived and moved. It was as if we were given a complete reprise of the life of Bhagavan, filled with interesting anecdotes, punctuated with humor and laughter. We would ask him questions to encourage his flow of reminiscences, and he would share stories of Bhagavan without a trace of hesitation. He would also sing various Sanskrit compositions in ecstasy as we walked, and he would suggest that we take the name of Bhagavan from time to time. Viswanathan Swami told us that the Bhagavan that he knew and grew into manhood with was very different from the aloof person presented in so many books. Bhagavan, he said, was the most entertaining, the most humorous, the most human of preceptors. When Bhagavan told a story, he became the protagonists. At times, Viswanathan and his fellow disciples would be dissolved in laughter at the antics and stories of Bhagavan. This was the attitude of Bhagavan with those completely and totally surrendered to him. He was not only their preceptor, but their friend, their father, and their mother as well. After we returned to New York City, Viswanathan Swami's letters came infrequently, so our hearts would take a leap whenever we saw his beautiful hand on a letter addressed to the devotees of Arunachala Ashram. His letters were addressed to us all. In one letter he admonished us, saying we should not spend so much money on postage and photographs. Bhagavan, he said, was economical in all things, with the exception of one alone, the abundant grace that he showers on us all. That's the end of part 1. And so I'll read a few letters we got from Viswanathan Swami, a few gems of wisdom. In one he wrote, "May Sri Bhagavan and the Mother grant you unswerving abidance at the heart. The heart is the whole of Bhagavan's teaching in one word, the heart. And it has been clearly expounded in chapter 5 of Sri Ramana Gita. If possible, one should study it in the Sanskrit text itself. It is so inspiring. The universe is nothing but the mind, and the mind is nothing but the heart. Thus the entire story of the universe culminates in the heart." In a letter to Bhagavad-ji, he wrote, "If one gives up selfish activity, that is sannyas. According to Bhagavad Gita, the life of such a one, his every breath will be for the good of the whole world. Bhagavan was an example to all of such unselfish activity. May the blessings of Bhagavan be upon you all forever. Ever yours, Viswanathan." In a letter to us all, he thanked everybody for the beautiful birthday cards we sent from New York and Nova Scotia. He said he was saving our cards. He said, "For all of you, I am dearest." He said, "Leave alone individual relationships. Study the 5 verses on the one self of all, Ekatma Panchakam, again and again, and realize that there is but one self. We are all one in it. It is the last of Sri Bhagavan's utterances. Feel one with the whole universe. That is universal love." So then in 1979, January, my second opportunity to go back to Ramanashramam came. And on that occasion, I think it was just Bhagavad and I who went. And Bhagavad then went north to join his family. So that day, that time I went, I was a girl with a plan. Those were pre-digital days. So we seemed to move around the world armed with cassette tapes and shoebox tape recorders. Does anyone remember them? For your time? My hope on this visit was to record Viswanathan Swami's reminiscences and recitations and to memorialize his spiritual wisdom on tape for my friends back home and future devotees. So, with this plan in mind, I sewed a pocketbook that would just fit a shoebox tape recorder. I knew that Swamiji received visitors in the afternoon before the Vedas, and so, armed with my trusty shoebox tape recorder, hidden in my pocketbook, I entered the room and sat beside him. The Swami on that occasion was alone. Gently I asked if he would share some of his early experiences with Bhagavan. And just at the moment he began to say something, I slid out the recorder from my pocketbook and pressed the record button. Click. Was he to be so easily fooled? Of course, he heard the sound of the button and told me to turn off the tape recorder, foiling in a second my carefully laid scheme. By nature all kindness and compassion, however, Viswanathan Swami, in the midst of numerous literary projects and voluminous editing for the Mountain Path, and in spite of his own weakened health, carved out an hour each day to give me a Sanskrit class. I had already learned Devanagari script in Hindi class one summer. Those indeed were blessed and happy hours when I sat by his side and he shared with me Sanskrit slokas and songs. First and foremost, the compositions of Bhagavan, sacred compositions of ancient Vedic tradition, and his own verses also, written with the guidance of Bhagavan and Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni. In fact, Viswanath Swami filled up a notebook for me with the compositions of Bhagavan and some other slokas, and the day before I left, he presented this priceless treasure to me with the name Bhamati inscribed in the inner cover. In my case, Viswanath Swami used kindness to encourage detachment, friendliness to encourage dispassion. My attitude with him was one of complete and childlike trust, like that of a young girl with her father. This was confirmed on one occasion when I went to Swamiji's room for my daily Sanskrit class. I took my seat by his side as usual. Unexpectedly, a Kashmiri gentleman had come that day, and Swamiji enthusiastically said to him, "You see how, like a little girl, she feels no shyness to sit by my side. I am an unmarried man. I have no issue, but I have my brother's children. She is like one of them." This same solicitude was extended to all of us in Arunachala ashram and only demonstrates his extreme graciousness. On another occasion, after he advised me not to go on pradakshina, with a mischievous look in his eyes, he inquired the next day, "So, did you go round the hill this morning?" Naturally, I had not. He personally intervened when two other devotees in Arunachala ashram had intended to climb the hill before going to then Madras the same day. Swamiji requested them to forego the climb, which they did. Like Arunachala, he could appear aloof, yet at one and the same time, he was a disinterested witness and a most compassionate father for us. Sri Bhagavan gave me the grace not to delude myself with the expectation of seeing Swami Vishwanath again in physical form. So how much more poignant was my leave-taking in March of 1979. Swami understood this as well, and he could not have been more compassionate. My next to last night, I encountered the Swami pacing the veranda in front of Sri Bhagavan's Samadhi. Mrs. McIver approached us, and she told me of Swamiji. "He is my oldest friend here. He took me on my first pradakshina." "He may not be my oldest friend, but he's my best friend," I replied. Laughingly, Swamiji graciously exclaimed, "Friend, child, daughter, niece, she is all these to me. I feel she is my own child." How these blessed parting words assured me of Swamiji's continuing solicitude and interest in me and all of my fellow devotees.
Which one?
The one on the choki? You have the picture?
Yeah, we did.
I
You
have
did that already?
one.
In my humble experience, it sometimes happens that what appears to be going on outwardly may be quite different from what is happening inwardly. To all appearances, I was a young woman studying Sanskrit at the side of a gracious old man. Yet, there was never a time that I was not aware that I was in the presence of a rare and great soul, in the presence of one of burning dispassion and immaculate renunciation, whose experience of the self was firmly established, yet clothed in the guise of an understated devotee. On one occasion, I had requested Swamiji to narrate some incidents from his association with Sri Bhagavan, and significantly, he remained silent some moments. He then prefaced his remarks by saying, Sri Bhagavan has given me the experience that he is none other than my own self. He is not external to me. Silence was the context of all that Viswanathan Swami said and did. Many were blessed to feel it to be so, which is why people gathered in his room for a while, before afternoon Vedic recitations, to dive deep in the atmosphere of silence that his proximity afforded. In this context, and by way of conclusion, I would like to share with you the words of what I believe must have been his last letter to us. What is there to write and communicate? Shankara sings in his Sarva Vedant Siddhant Sar Sangraha, which I studied in my teens. Silence, silence, and again silence. Silence, silence, and nothing more. Silence is where jnana and bhakti meet. There cannot be any talk in profound jnana and bhakti. Yet, Shankara has written so many commentaries and composed so many original works and hymns in praise of all the deities to draw to the center various persons in various stages of spiritual development. Dakshinamurti taught in silence. Shankara condescended to help through reasoning as well. And Ramana is Dakshinamurti and Shankara in one form. He is Arunachala in human form. Words are inadequate to describe him. Those who are fortunate to enter into the spirit of Arunachala by divine grace are saved, i.e., they no more exist as separate individuals. They are once and for all lost in Bhagavan. To be lost is to be saved. Ahamapetakam nija vibhanakam mahadidam tapo ramana vagyam. After all this, how am I to sign my name? Love to all of you. Sorry, 25 minutes. So now we're going to hear his recording, right? Of his-
Yeah. It didn't come out that well. It's from an old tape, and we're trying to do some restoration of the tapes. So let's see what other things we have.
While Dennis is getting this going, I would like to mention that Viswanathan Swami said to me once, which I think is very significant, that Upadesh Sar should be sung slowly. And a very magnificent, dignified composition. Of course, we just read Bhagavan said we should sing and dance to it also.
And that's not Malayalam. That's for Kerala people.
Who are the three there? Was that Murugar,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kunju
Muruganar,
Swami,
Kunju Swami,
Viswanathan
son.
Swami? Okay.
Muruganar didn't like his picture being taken, I don't think. That's what I heard. And you can tell by that
But
pose he's giving
Yeah.
there.
You'd get out of the frame, you would get out of the frame.
Evelyn, your first introduction, I didn't catch it fully. So Bhagavat knew him?
No, none of us had known
You
him.
just went there and he was the person
They just
who...
plopped us down on his chokey in front of him, that was it.
Ah.
Who's that little guy in there?
That's KV Mama.
K. Venkataraman.
Chalama's
Chalama,
son.
yeah.
Achamo brought up Chalama. That's Chalama's son. He's no more.
Then
Kumar
he
is there.
stayed in the ashram, right?
What?
Later he stayed in the ashram. He remembers
He built a
that?
cottage there and used to go back and
Yeah.
forth, stay with us. Yeah. So I heard that when Swami Viswanathan was with his mother, Dindigul, I guess, Dindigul she died, right? Vishwanath's mother. And she used to do puja daily. And she had one item wrapped up in a little cloth, and she used to offer puja to that also. And no one actually knew what was in that cloth. And so after she passed away, Swami Vishwanath said she was a pure Advaitan, my mother. And very spiritually involved. He used to speak highly of his mother. And but she did that puja, and so when she passed away, they opened that cloth up, and look what it was. It was something in Bhagavan's handwriting. It's 108 names of Bhagavan, which he wrote in praise of Bhagavan. And he wrote in his own handwriting and gave it to her. And she worshipped it, in her altar, in her shrine.
So Bhagavan wrote it in his own hand?
Yeah, and gave it to her. Gave it to Viswanath Swami's mother. Yeah. He also told me once, he said, Bhagavan told me this, and he didn't want me to tell anyone else, but he said after he came there, in 1896, he went to the Ayom Kulam tank and threw away everything. Then he came back to the temple, and a shower of rain came on him. It was supposed to be symbolic of the bath prior to taking renunciation. He said the rain didn't come in the sound of the Tudar Namale. It wasn't raining until just right overhead of him.
Wow.
But he said, Bhagavan said, don't tell people this. So, he had many reminiscences about Bhagavan.
Dennis, is that piece of paper preserved?
What's that?
Where Bhagavan wrote
108 names?
and gave it to...
Do they have it in the archives? I forgot to ask if it's in the archives. I don't know how to look. I'm sure it's preserved, probably by their family. There was 5 brothers. One, Shiva, what was the one youngest brother that used to write to us? Shivaraman. His family may have it. It's probably preserved in the
Yes,
family.
I asked them, but Viswanatha Swami's handwriting we don't have. We have given everything to ashram. Must be RMCL must have got, they told me.
Oh yeah, because
They came and once interviewed. Shivaraman's wife is still alive, I told you once. 93 years old in Madras.
Shivaraman said, Swami didn't have to die. He was complaining. He wanted to die. He could have lived longer.
I remember him saying that. I can recollect now.
What?
Viswanatha Swami.
Yeah,
I've gone and my mother has taken me and
to see him. Yeah.
namaskaram and
were in ashram,
Ashramatala.
and that room, that dispensary
Yeah,
room.
dispensary room. I've gone because this photo is very familiar.
Yeah.
This must be the oldest, right? Around 77,
Yeah,
78.
near the end.
Nearly the end, yeah.
He also told us when Karyakanta Ganapati Muni had that Kapala Beda, and his head cracked. He said he put his hand over his head and he could feel, so I can see, he said he could feel hot air gushing out from the top of his skull. Swami Viswanathan said that, yeah. But Bhagavan used to advise him how to do sadhana.
Ah.
And he would say, go to this place, and he was doing Gayatri Mantra. Tell him, you go do that, you sit there and you do it for so many hours, this time, so many hours, and even he would come and check up. Although he was oblivious of it because he's focused on his sadhana. But Bhagavan, since his father, he agreed to his father.
Yeah, yes.
Dennis tell that story when his father passed away. Bhagavan came to Vishwanath to ask him. Remember?
About,
Whether he wanted to go back.
you tell her, I can't remember which one. Sorry.
Vishwanath Swami's father, Vishwanath Swami had run away from home and he was living with Bhagavan and all that. And I think he probably was he was young adult when his father passed away. And his father did have property that was to be divided up. And he said he had just heard the news and he was just standing by the ashram gate. Bhagavan came up to him and said, Vishwanath, do you want to go back? And Vishwanath said no. And he said, that day, that settled it for me. But Bhagavan was still asking me, do you want to go back to the world and get your property and do whatever you want? And Vishwanath said no. And he said that was the seal, that now I am an official whatever.
But you can read his reminiscences are in the mountain paths in the 78 and 79. He wrote in the...
I have a page here he wrote about his mother,
Go.
her dispassion.
Yeah.
It's all in his very neatest handwriting, so it must be intended for someone to read, so.
Can
Of
you
his
pass
mother.
that paper around after you read to
Pardon?
see his handwriting?
Oh, of course. She is an extraordinary woman. None of the calamities have shaken her. She is serene, dignified, and childlike in her indifference to so many things of the world that usually disturb even those endowed with a clear intellectual grasp of what is what. I am sure that apart from her natural makeup that way, her lifelong adherence to the divine, culminating in her contact with Bhagavan and her deep and real devotion to him, stand by her now and sustain her in her otherwise pitiable physical condition. I am reminded of her advice to my father, who was himself a man of unalloyed Advaitic conviction, as he was being taken to hospital for strangulated hernia. Look here, your son and the doctor are there to take care of your body, and so turn your whole attention to what you have held as ultimate reality all these years. My late younger brother, Arsh Subramanian, who also had inherited that adherence to Advaita, reported to me the above with great admiration for Mother's presence of mind. Yes, undisturbed, unruffled inner serenity under all the changing circumstances of life is the greatest asset an intelligent person would care for. Bhagavan has opened our eyes to the great fact of life, that unruffled serenity, shanti, is our very nature, and that all disturbing waves are only on the surface, and that they also are nothing but the reality, when viewed from the heart, the ultimate source of everything. Understanding is beyond thought, and so is real love or devotion. Shall we pass this one around?
Yeah.
See us right? So, you want to start? Want to take a
Dennis,
photo?
when 108 names of Bhagavan was written and was presented to him, what was Bhagavan's reaction? What did he
No, it wasn't, even while he was writing it, he's showing Bhagavan, and also Ganapati Muni went over, both Bhagavan and Ganapati Muni. Even there was another 108 names written that was a little bit popular, but Bhagavan would refer people to his. And even those who wanted to read it, he said, you don't have to read their life, just read those 108 names.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Almost.